Hey, all, this is Professor Steve from Grand Canyon University, and I wanted to bring you a video today. This is installing the Active Directory Domain Services role, as well as promoting your Server 2012 machine to be a domain controller. In ITT 121, this most lines up with week two's assignment. So that'll be good for that, but useful for any other environment when you need to have a domain controller. So let's jump in here and get started. Just to preface what I've got going on so far, we have a Server 2012, a virtual machine running Server 2012 R2 standard edition, straight out of the box, basically. I have done a little bit of configuration, and I wanted to make sure you did that configuration as well before you jump in and actually do your DC promotion. So once you're in Server Manager, if you go on the left to local server, what I've done already is I've changed my computer name to something more appropriate for this machine, something that's not just some random generated characters like win dash something. And it's in a work group right now, so that tells me that I'm not in a domain. I don't have anything going on there. I don't have in the left hand column here, I don't have anything that says Active Directory Domain Services, so I know the role is not installed yet. So the other thing is I want to make sure that you have a statically assigned IP address. And you can click on the IP there. You can go to Properties, and then if you go to Properties of TCP/IP version 4, you can see that we're using the following address means I'm statically assigned it. And you can check out the videos on my page that reference ensuring VM communication, as well as installing Server 2012 R2. There are some steps that I go through to make sure that I've got the IP addresses assigned, the computer names changed, that type of thing. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and install the role. So there's one of two ways. You can go to Manage and add roles and features, or you can just click it right here underneath this quick start area. So if you add roles and features, you're going to hit next. Again, this Server 2012 incorporates some ability to remotely install some roles and features on different servers. So what we're looking for is role-based or feature-based install, so this specific machine that's getting those. Here, select a server from the pool. This is basically itself. Again, Server 2012 has the ability to push or remotely install roles, and if I had the ability to, I could choose a different server here, a remote server to install these on and kind of do it remotely. So hit next. And then what we're looking for here is Active Directory Domain Services, and we just check the box. And this is going to tell you here that it's going to install some additional tools, the Active Directory Administrative Center, a module for Windows PowerShell, that type of thing. So we're just hit Add Features. Hit Next. These are additional features. If you want to install like .NET 3.5, down here you can install a Telnet client or SNMP service, anything like that. So it's just if you wanted some features in there, that's where you would do that at. But for Active Directory Domain Services, we do not need that. Just some helpful information here. You hit Next. And here I'm going to hit install, and it's going to go through this installation process. Once that's finished, we'll be back. Alright, so as you can see here that my configuration or my installation completed successfully. It does say configuration required because there is a step that you have to go through to actually turn your Active Directory Domain Services role here into a domain controller, your server into a domain controller. So I'm going to go ahead and close. You could click right here that says promote this server to a domain controller, but sometimes you're all next, finish, and you hit close, and you just you miss that one. So I'm going to show you how to do it outside of this little wizard. So you can look down the left-hand side. ADDS, or Active Directory Domain Services, is installed, and life is good there. You'll notice now you have this little yellow triangle with an exclamation point in it. If I click that, I have this little link here that says promote this server to a domain controller. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to click on that. And this is really the step-by-step process to configure it. It's a nice, easy wizard. It's nothing really critical going on here. So you have some options here to begin with. It defaults to add a domain controller to an existing domain. So if this was your second server that you were trying to make as a domain controller in an organization, this would be fine. You would hit select on the domain, find the domain that you already had that existed, and then carry on through the rest of the process. Add a new domain to an existing forest. This is the concept of adding a child domain to an existing forest. So a forest can have multiple domains underneath it, not just one. You could have a sales.instructor.net or a marketing.instructordomain.net or something like that. And these are really separated. They trust each other as far as Active Directory goes, but they are their own separate entity underneath one umbrella, as it were. But what we're looking for today is to add a new forest. So if you don't have a domain existing, this is where you're going to go. See, actually, it does say add a new forest, but you're really creating a new forest and a new domain in this process. So here I'm just going to do, let's do instructor.net. It doesn't really matter what you use here. I do have to spell it correctly. So once you have that in there, hit next. And the assignments, it has you do like win.instructor.net. You can do that if you want to. You don't have to necessarily, just as long as you have a good domain name in there. Let's just do main names gcuinstructor.net. So hit next. Okay. So it's still processing here. Once it finishes, then you'll have the ability to select here. So you'll notice that when we went through this process, DNS server was not installed as a role as part of this process. If it's not on there and this is your first domain controller, it will install the DNS server role during the wizard. So you could install DNS originally to begin with by itself. That would be fine as well, but since this process does it for us, we're just going to let it go. Leave your functional levels, server 2012 R2. Those are basically, you only have one server in here. There's different forest levels based on what your operating system is. They basically give additional functionality to the system or to the domain based on your level. But in this case, we'll just use 2012 R2. Your directory services restore mode password is used if your Active Directory ever goes pear-shaped and you need to get at a command line, like in a recovery mode type of thing. You will need to authenticate into the recovery console with this password. This is not the admin password for your domain, and I would not recommend it being the same. This should always be different. You should never use passwords across anything you do, whether it be your email, your domain, your local systems, whatever. So in this case, I'm just going to choose password, something I can remember. Hit next. And it's going to give you a little warning here about some DNS information. This is really just a soft error. You can just go right through it. Basically, just making sure that if you're integrating with an existing DNS infrastructure, you should manually create a delegation for the DNS server in the parent zone to ensure reliable name resolution from outside the domain gcuinstructor.net. So a lot of companies will do a gcu.edu. That may be their domain name on the outside, so like from the web perspective as well as the inside. And so you have to have some kind of separation there of this is the inside, this is the outside. So in our environment, we made at work our domain inside domain.net and our outside domain.com. And so that way I know that there's no rollover from each side. So just click OK and next. This process is going to choose your NetBIOS domain name. It is limited to 15 characters. Give you just a second. So, and you notice it took the .NET off because the NetBIOS name is basically the precursor to DNS. So it was before DNS, and now we have DNS, and this just is really used for backwards compatibility. Hit next. These are your default locations for your database log files and sysvol folders. We just usually leave those normal. It's not really necessary to change those. It's basically giving you a review of everything you've already selected in here. You hit next, and it's going to go through the process of confirming that you've met all the prerequisites for this system to be a domain controller. This process takes a little bit, and then once we get back, which actually on my system actually finished pretty quickly, as long as you have this green check mark at the top here, this is all prerequisite checks passed successfully, you're good to go. These warnings here are basically informational that, like for this one, you should definitely go in and change your weaker cryptographic algorithms. After the fact, in the lab environment, you don't have to do that. Again, we've already seen this this warning from a previous screen, so we don't have to worry about that one. So right now we're ready to go. So we just hit install. It's going to start the process. And once it finishes, you'll be prompted to install or to reboot your machine. Whether that it'll do it automatically for you within, I think, a minute or so, or else you can hit close and restart immediately. So you can see here it's in the progress. It is going through the process of adding the schema objects that it does by default, setting the DNS name, doing some security stuff, configuring DNS service to run. In your environment with an Active Directory domain server, you have to have at least one one DNS server. This is what I was telling you. It's about to be signed out, so I can just hit close and close, and it should restart the system here automatically for me in just a second. But your domain has to have a DNS server. If you don't have a DNS server, your domain will not work. Your Active Directory will not work. So you have to keep that in mind. From a best practices standpoint, and again, this is best practices in the real world, you should have more than one domain controller in your environment. If you have only one and it were to crash or whatever, you're going to have to start over from scratch, which is very, very painful if you don't have good backups. So if you have two domain controllers, then you have the ability to basically one of them be offline, the other one will pick up the load. If one of them were to crash entirely, then you would still have one that can basically take over until you can rebuild the one that crashed or whatever. So the last thing to note is so this is our only server. We promoted it to a domain controller, and once it's promoted to a domain controller, there is no more local users and computers type of thing on the system. It's all converted to Active Directory domain objects, domain users, things like that. And so that's you won't have a local anymore. So that's all I have for this video, and we'll see you next time.